Hello again. Today we continue with our principles from the parables series by examining the parable of the sower, which it was recounted by Jesus. Let's recall that our purpose in examining the parables is to draw from them principles of victorious Christian living that are so timeless they're applicable today. It strikes me that this parable is particularly relevant to Christ followers who are active in evangelism, as all Christ followers should be, but it also has general relevance for Christ followers whose focus may have been directed by God into other crucial areas, such as discipleship. It also has something to say to all who have not yet given their lives over to Jesus Christ. The parable of the sower is recounted by Jesus in two parts, the first of which is the actual parable as recorded in Matthew 13, verses 1 to 9. That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him, so that he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil, but when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil, and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. The second part explains the meaning of the parables as given by Jesus to his listeners, and can be found in Matthew 13, verses 18 to 23. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy, yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while, and when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown amongst thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Let's now look at what we can draw from the words of Christ in this parable. It's significant that this parable focuses upon sowing and not reaping. In last week's message concerning the rich man and Lazarus, to which you will find a link at the end of this video, the point was made that no matter how good an argument Christ followers have in presenting the good news to others, some people will just not believe. I want to reinforce this point here because Christ followers should never become despondent or despair when their efforts to share the good news seems to fall on deaf ears, so to speak. The principle reinforced in the title of this parable is that Christ followers are called by God to sow, which means to share the good news. The reaping, and by this I mean someone's acceptance of Christ's gift, is the responsibility of God alone. In other words, we are called to sow and leave the reaping to God. We live in a world that in many ways is preoccupied with the devil. In fact, the devil, vampires, witches and so on are popular themes in movies and TV series. It seems from numerous documentaries that Satan worship is becoming an increasingly significant factor in the popular music industry too. I'm not sure to what extent those involved understand what they're getting into when they engage with the devil and his demons, but one thing is certain, and that is that Satan is not a force to be taken lightly. This is because Jesus not only confirms his existence, but also his intention in verse 19 of Matthew 13, which tells us when anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. Satan's intention is to snatch away our salvation, and we are talking about eternal consequences here. This snatching away places Satan's victims on the road to hell, where an eternity will be spent in the company of Satan and his demons. An eternity which is described by Jesus as one in which there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. That's in Luke 13, verse 28. Satan, man's enemy, has two major means of achieving this snatching away. The first is through the temptations of this world. Satan is the temporary prince of this world, placed here to ensure that individuals have a choice to follow Christ rather than being slavishly programmed to be obedient to God. For the purpose of choice, God has granted Satan temporary and limited powers to provide an alternative future. A future where we're all free to reject God in favour of what this world has to offer, but succumbing to Satan's temptations and perceived gain eventually leads to long-term loss. Eternity, for those who follow Satan and reject Jesus, is clearly described in the Bible in Revelation 14, verse 11, as a place where the smoke of their torment will rise forever and ever, and they will have no relief day or night. Now, these may sound hard words, but no harder than Jesus himself shared, and better a hard word today than weeping and devastating regret tomorrow. Satan's second means of snatching away one's salvation is through the sowing of doubt. This has been his tactic from the word go and has a history stretching way back to the book of Genesis, when he said to Eve in chapter 3 verse 1, "Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" Doubt in this modern world is fostered by the so-called intellectuals with numerous academic qualifications who have an atheistic worldview and seem to speak with authority in denying the existence of God. We need to know that their seemingly convincing arguments have no foundation in hard evidence, and they cannot stand against the obvious fact that we, who feel, empathize, dream, and sacrifice, do these things because we were created by God in his image, and not by some random process called evolution. In verses 20 to 22 of the parable, our attention is drawn to the sowing on rocky ground and amongst thorns. The main point here is that both conditions do not provide the basis for a faith that can endure the trials, tribulations, and challenges of this world. We need to link this back to Satan's snatching away tactics too, because we need to recognize that any new Christian becomes an immediate enemy of the devil, and he will do everything in his power to make the new believer's life difficult with a view to ultimately snatching away their newfound faith. Christ followers in their evangelistic efforts sometimes neglect the importance of discipleship, which is essential to ground a Christian faith on a solid footing. Discipleship involves teaching the new believer the fundamentals and importance of prayer, reading God's word, church participation, and especially warning the new follower to expect the inevitable attacks. However, it's also important to let new believers know that God is in ultimate control and will be with them and protecting them through any challenges he allows into their lives to enable them to become more Christ-like. In the course of this walk, new believers need to know that they are on a course to develop the wonderful qualities of fortitude, courage, perseverance, love, and the many other good things that characterize Christ. All this needs to be shared to offset the attempts by the enemy to snatch away the faith. Understanding is mentioned twice in the parable of the sower. Verse 19 informs us that anyone who does not understand the word of the kingdom falls into Satan's clutches. And verse 23 reinforces the fact that understanding of the word is essential for the new Christ follower to be established and begin to bear fruit. I think we need to view the word understanding in two ways. The first is spiritual understanding. The gospel has many layers to it. It's simple enough for a child to grasp, yet it has many layers of meaning and becomes complex enough to tax the best of intellects. In presenting the gospel message, we sometimes find that without going into great depths of explanation, the receiver of the message seems to understand it completely, as if he or she locks onto it spiritually, so to speak. Perhaps we can call such people Christians in waiting. For them, the simple message of the gospel is all that is needed for them to come to Christ. The second way to view understanding is to see it more as a mind-engaging activity, which involves the presenter of the gospel message in sharing the logic of the message, the archaeological and historical evidence for the authenticity of the Bible, and perhaps the deeper meanings in the Bible and so on. Such information is often needed by those who are open to listening, but more skeptical than people in the Christians in waiting category. We need to remember here that no matter what the category, people do not become believers by our efforts. It is God who works in them directly. I believe that understanding involves the heart and the head. Christians in waiting come to Christ with little need for intellectualizing and with an almost immediate heart connection to the gospel message. On the other hand, those who are more skeptical may engage the head first, understanding that following Christ does not involve intellectual suicide, after which their hearts engage with the message of salvation. What is important, especially in this day and age, is that the Christ follower have both a heart commitment to God's message of salvation, coupled with a knowledge of the fundamental grounds for a belief in a Creator God. The devil is always looking to use people to challenge the Christian faith, to snatch away the possibility of salvation, and Christ followers need to have the understanding necessary to combat the enemy's tactics of deception. Part of the answer comes down to the effective discipleship of new believers, as we've already mentioned. But I also believe that when someone really gives their life to Christ, they will begin to develop a thirst for knowledge of the faith through regular Bible reading and possibly other Christian writings which go under the label of apologetics literature. Two Bible verses spring to mind in discussing the need for Christ followers to fully understand the basis for their faith. In Hosea 4 verse 6 we read, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." And in 1 Peter 3:15, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have." In Matthew 13 verse 23 we read, "As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. What this is describing is the multiplier effect. Other than a realization that evangelizing is a sowing activity, not a reaping one, Christ followers need to understand that in sharing the gospel, their sharing may only touch one person out of many with whom the message is shared. Yet this is considered a resounding success in the Lord's eyes, and it should be in yours, for it means he has chosen them, and every true believer will go on to share the good news with numerous others during their lifetime. We might just think for a minute about the person who shared the good news with Billy Graham to comprehend the power of the multiplier effect. What does this all mean for the modern day follower of Christ? Well, first, they need to understand that they are charged by Jesus Christ to share his good news, the gospel, with as many people as possible. This is the Great Commission message. They also need to understand that their role is one of sowing, meaning sharing the good news, and so leave the converting to God. Consequently, there is no room for despair and despondency in this central task of evangelism. Secondly, Christ followers need to ensure that they do not neglect the essential task of discipleship, which grounds the new believer in the faith and helps to combat the attacks of Satan working through the world and its temptations, and through seeds of doubt willingly watered by the aggressive atheists that exist these days. Thirdly, all Christ followers need to have a fundamental knowledge of the basis for a belief in Christ. In their evangelizing efforts, they will come across people who become open to the message by being convinced of the evidence in favour of the Christian faith and the flimsy basis for alternative worldviews. In addition, knowledge of God's promises reinforces the fact that Christ followers should have no fear of man or death. This absence of fear, especially of man, provides a solid basis for sharing the good news, as obedience to God takes precedence over any reluctance to share the faith with those who are lost and probably don't even know it. I want to turn my attention finally to those of you watching or listening to this message who are currently not followers of Christ. Earlier, I spoke about the devil being real and his plan for the non-believer's life. Hopefully, that part of the message made you think about your own eternity. And if that's the case, I recommend you talk to a Christian you respect about how you can avoid Satan's plan for your life. If this is not possible for any reason, then please feel free to contact me by emailing goodnews@thelittlecHurchGrow.org, and I'll be more than happy to help. So, I hope this message has given food for thought, and I look forward to you joining me next week for more principles from the parables. Until next time, goodbye and God bless.